Hey guys, what's going on? Another video over here at CH Labs. And I know it's kind of crazy how time flies this fast, but there have already been 17 generations of iPhone released. 17 consecutive year after year releases of these things. And the iPhone's almost old enough to be a legal adult at this point, which sounds just crazy. I mean, it doesn't feel more than that long ago where the iPhone 10 just came out and now we're on the 15 series, and it really doesn't even feel like much longer before that where the 5 and the 5S's were out. And for some people, it feels like just a couple years ago that the original iPhone came out. So, I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about how fast these things have come by. And it's kind of getting to a point where just 1 year after another, even 2 years after another, sometimes it's kind of hard to notice the difference, right? From one generational leap to the next, from maybe even two leaps to the next, when you get people that get a year after year phone, or maybe even get 2 years every phone, new phone every 2 years. It doesn't really feel like there's a whole lot coming in to that sometimes, but I thought it'd be interesting to just take a step back and maybe look at every 5 years, how much they're able to pack into every device every 5 years, just to kind of appreciate how much is in these devices these days and how much more they can keep cramming into just this tiny, tiny little body. So here in front of me, I have a iPhone 5S, a iPhone 10, and the iPhone 15 Pro Max. So we'll be going over some of the key differences and some of the selling points, maybe, if you will, of each phone, and just see how much Apple was actually able to cram in 5 years of advancements from generation to generation, and just kind of have some fun with it. So why don't we take a look? So starting with the design of these things, obviously the iPhone 5S being the smallest one, and holding it in your hands in 2023, it feels like just a tiny, tiny little pebble. I mean, it feels just absolutely adorable, if I'm going to be honest with you. I see why there's a small market for small phones, pun intended, but I can't see the joy in this thing lasting more than just 2 minutes for the nostalgia of it. I know that some people really, really would like if Apple would continue to just keep making a small phone. I know that the iPhone mini series had a small but dedicated fan base, and unfortunately that's just not the case anymore. There seems to be a much bigger market for much bigger phones, hence with the direction of like the 15 Pro Max being one of the most popular phones that they sell. But that still doesn't change the fact that the design of the iPhone 5S is, in and of itself, still very, very modern and very, very Apple. Almost lost my 10 here. I'm not going to pull a Linus and set it down. But the design of this thing still feels very Apple today, still feels very modern, and you can see where the inspiration came back into the iPhone 15 with these flat edges. With the display on it, it is 4 inches. It was the first one to get a screen increase from the 3.5 inches of the 4 series, right? The iPhone 5 was the first one to get that 4-inch screen bump from 3.5 inches, and the 5S keeps that here. It was 326 ppi at 60 hertz, so not super sharp or super fast by today's standards, but again, nothing ugly to look at either. When you go ahead and use the phone in 2023, it doesn't feel sluggish, and it definitely doesn't look grainy or anything. It looks like a good, fresh smartphone display, thanks partly to the fact that it's shrunk down to only 4 inches, so you can't quite tell that the resolution isn't fully there. And the max brightness on it was only 500 nits, so using it in sunlight today isn't really going to be the most comfortable experience for very long, but it was definitely there, and it was very, very good for, I believe, 2013. So moving on to the iPhone 10, it packs a significantly larger 5.8 inch display, and it is not to be underestimated how much better this display is. I mean, it's just it feels like a full 5 years of advancement over the 5S, and that should be pretty obvious. It packed OLED, it's got 458 ppi, still 60 hertz, but it was HDR, it was million to one contrast ratio, a increase in brightness, it had True Tone, it had 3D touch. It was just all around a way more capable display, earning it that Super Retina display name over the 5S's standard Retina display. It also, obviously, has that controversial Face ID notch, so you can have your Face ID authentication instead of the 5S's Touch ID authentication. Still today in 2023, a somewhat controversial move. Some people may prefer Touch ID, some people may prefer Face ID. Personally, I think there's room for a future device that has both, but I really don't think that will ever happen. I think Apple's stance has basically just been Face ID on the iPhone, and that's the way it works going forward. But it's fun to wish, right? And moving up to the biggest of the bunch, the iPhone 15 Pro Max, it feels just Goliath compared to the other two with a 6.7-inch display. The resolution is basically identical to the iPhone 10, but it's 120 hertz now, which makes a massive difference because when you're scrolling on anything, if you're sending a text, if you're watching video, if you're playing a game, anything that you're doing on your phone is just going to feel and look twice as smooth, and it's not an understatement how much nicer it is. Once you go to 120 hertz, you're just not going back, kind of thing. It has twice the contrast ratio of the iPhone 10. It has 1,000 max nit brightness now when you're using it, so it's super bright. It has 2,000 nit max brightness in sunny outdoor environments, so no matter how bright the sun gets, you're going to be able to look at your phone, no problem. It's super easy to use in outdoor environments. And it has the dynamic island now instead of just standard Face ID notch, so they've actually tried to, incorporate it into the UI a little bit more. So when you're listening to music, if you're doing anything in the background, like directions or anything like that, it'll start to like dynamically bubble around the top of the display to just kind of keep you engaged with your background activity and kind of embrace the dynamic island now, instead of like with the Face ID notch where they tried to hide it away. Now they're really embracing it and making it part of the UI, and I think it's kind of fun. And now it finally has an always-on display. So after years and years of the iPhone lacking an always-on display compared to the Android counterparts, you finally can set an always-on display. And with how efficient the display is, being able to go all the way down to 1 hertz, it really makes a very, very small to no impact on your daily battery life. If you turn on your low power mode, it's going to turn the always-on display off just to try to save every little bit of power. But overall, it doesn't really make a difference to your battery, and I think it looks fantastic. The iPhone 10 moved up to dual lens 12 megapixel cameras, so it had a 12 megapixel wide angle camera and a 12 megapixel 2x telephoto lens, so you could do zooming optically now up to 2 times or up to 10 times digital zoom, so significantly more zoom than the 5S. It also had portrait mode, portrait lighting, optical image stabilization. It had live photos, HDR, 4K video up to 60 FPS. The selfie camera had Face ID in it. It was 7 megapixels. It had significantly more capabilities in the iPhone 10 than the iPhone 5S one. So moving up to the iPhone 15 Pro Max, again, it follows that pattern of taking another massive step forward in the camera department. This time it has a triple lens camera with a dedicated LiDAR depth scanner. And that main wide angle camera is 48 megapixels this time, so again taking a massive leap forward over its predecessors. It gains a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera this time, so you can actually zoom out to collect a wider picture, very useful for bigger groups or taking a large nature shot. It definitely has its circumstances and its uses. And it has a 12 megapixel telephoto lens, but this time it's up to 5 times telephoto zoom, so you can zoom in even farther and still keep that original optical quality, but it'll also give you up to 25 times digital zoom now, so even more zoom over the predecessor. It had next generation portraits with LiDAR scanning this time, thanks to the dedicated depth scanner that I mentioned earlier. So it has a sensor that's actually just dedicated to collecting depth information to give you even more accurate portraits and more accurate portrait lighting. It had 4K video recording up to 60 FPS again. It has a cinematic mode up to 4K at 30 FPS that will allow it to change different focuses automatically depending on where people are looking or the certain subject in the frame at the time. It's very, very useful for filmmakers. It has a action mode this time to help with even more stability as you're shaking, as you're like running, trying to record a video or whatever the case may be. It helps keep the video extremely stable. It has ProRes video recording this time, so you can take ProRes video for even more editing flexibility for later on when you take your footage and export it onto a computer to edit it. It gives you a more flexible work options, I'll say, and you can now do that in 4K 60 FPS. So that was just looking at some of the key differences between the iPhone 5S, the iPhone 10, and the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Again, sometimes, when you're looking at just one generation versus the next, or even two generations versus the next, you don't really notice that much of a difference, but clearly they're still doing something, because after 5 years of progress from the iPhone 5S to the iPhone 10, there was a massive leap in everything about the device. And same thing, going from the iPhone 10 to the iPhone 15 Pro Max, there's again just so much more under the hood of these things, and they're all just these tiny, tiny little pocket computers still. So it's just impressive how Apple and all smartphone manufacturers are able to just cram so much more into these tiny, tiny little packages. I think it's absolutely incredible, and it makes me really excited for 5 years down the line now. Hopefully we can get these same level of improvements in roughly the iPhone 20, 21, or whatever they'll call it by that point. But by then, hopefully, again, that you think that you're following my point, that whatever is 5 years from now will hopefully be these massive improvements over what we have, and it just makes me excited for the future. Alright, well again, if you guys made it to the end, thank you very much for watching another video over here at CH Labs, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.